to the B&FT chat, and today we'll be speaking to an energy economist and political risk analyst with over 7 years experience in energy analysis and in investment advice. His name is Dr. Theophilus Acheampong. He's our guest today on B&FT chat. Welcome, Dr. Theo.
Thank you very much, Kelly.
Look, so we'll be speaking about Ghana's oil and gas industry, and looking at the fact that it's been 10 years long since we found oil. We want to know how well have we fared as a country after 10 years?
I think after 10 years as a country, we actually haven't done too badly for ourselves. Again, this is off the back of the discoveries that were made in 2007, and we started production in 2010 with first oil around December of 2010. And 7 years down the line, we have seen that oil revenues have provided or have become a critical component of the nation's economic fabric, and going forward would continue to do so. So as we speak currently, oil revenues in total averages around 1.2% of the country's overall GDP, and that's actually forecasted to become much bigger in the medium term over the next 5 to 10 years off the back of new discoveries that have been made by the existing ramp-up of the 10 oil fields and then the Sankofa oil fields. So whereas we started with little to no oil production at all, within the last 2 to 3 years, we've moved up from an average of 100,000 barrels a day. Now we speak about 170,000 barrels a day, and that's increasingly going to move up well in excess of 250,000 barrels a day over the medium term.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about job creation. From what we understand, a lot of the jobs in the oil sector go to the expats, the foreigners, and we've been told that this is as a result of low capacity, which probably takes 10 years to build. And it's been 10 years so far, so one would ask, where are the engineers for the well drilling and then the high-end areas of the oil sector? Has Ghana done very well in preparing people, or Ghanaians I should say, for the oil sector to take over?
I do not think so, that we have actually done that much. In the early days of the discovery, and I recall very well when discussions were going on back and forth about local content, this was one of the key issues that came up. How do we create enough, engineers, geophysicists, supply chain persons, to take over the management of the industry? We passed the local content law in 2013, and it had all these huge targets that by 2020, we expect some of the mid to senior level management to be actually occupied by over 80% being Ghanaian. As we speak currently, the number is far below that, but that's partly because we did not put in place the necessary plans. We passed the law, but actually the roadmap that would ensure, in terms of training, in terms of the capacity needs, in terms of how many engineers we would need to take over, operations in the industry within the time frame that we're working with, that has not, taken place. It's still not too late, in the sense that we still have new oil and gas fields being discovered, and we've got new contracts also being signed. So it's still a work in progress, but in terms of the 7-year, window that we're talking within from 2010 to 2017-18, whether we have, done a lot to ensure that Ghanaians can take over operations in the industry in terms of building their capacity or their training or their needs, it's not really been done at a much more holistic level.
And so one would ask, is Ghana facing a resource case? Why are we finding oil and then not benefiting directly or seeing any development from it?
Yeah, it's a great question you ask in terms of whether Ghana is actually facing the resource case, or have we seen remnants of that, creeping up. Certainly, to an extent, we've seen bits of that, to the extent that back in 2015, when the budget was passed, before the oil price fall started going in place, at one point we were projecting in excess of $1.1 billion dollars of revenues coming in 2015. And then 6 months down the line, the prices went all the way to below $40 a barrel. And the finance minister had to go to parliament to present a supplementary budget. But that's also driven by the fact that when you look at the immediate period within which we discovered oil and started production, Ghana also moved from being a lower income country to becoming a lower middle income country, which then meant that we could no longer access some of the concessionary funding that we would get at relatively cheaper interest rates from outside. So what that meant really was that in the absence of those concessionary funding, in the absence of dwindling grants and revenues from our development partners, oil revenues came to replace that component of our budget item. So you would find out that when you look at the numbers from 2012, 13, 14, 15, you increasingly see oil revenue projections coming up, whereas revenue grants and concessions are going down. And that has a number of implications for the resource sort of curse theory that is being put around.
Let's look a bit at our legal environment in terms of regulation. First of all, how strong are legal regimes around our oil sector? We know the Petroleum Commission is the regulator. We know they are strong on local content. We know the Ministry of Energy also has an oversight responsibility on the sector. And we know Ghana has subscribed to one or two legal regimes, and then that's supposed to help us manage the oil well. How well is that being played out, and also how does Ghana compare to other countries in this area?
If you look at the period within which oil was discovered and the quickness within which we actually put in place the necessary legal and regulatory instruments, it's quite commendable. So, for example, we've seen the country pass the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. We've seen the country pass a new E&P law, the Exploration Production Law, Act 919, which replaces PNDC Law 8084, which had been in place prior to. And they have all gone in a very long way to strengthen the existing regulatory capacity of the industry. We've had the Petroleum Commission Act being passed. We've had the Local Content Act, LI 2204, being passed. These are the key sort of strands in terms of regulations that you need to ensure that the resources are effectively produced and then the revenues are efficiently utilized for the development of the country. So Ghana has done really, really well considering what's happening in other jurisdictions. And to actually put this into context, there's an institute which ranks all the petroleum producing jurisdictions across the world in terms of the policy, legal, regulatory environment. And if you look at the latest 2017 rankings from the Fraser Institute, in sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana ranks number 3 out of 13 jurisdictions that are known to have or produce oil. So Ghana is next to South Africa and then Namibia, which is at the top, and it beats its comparators like Nigeria, Angola, or even Cote d'Ivoire. But even when you look at that within the wider sort of geographical context, Ghana's offshore oil and gas policy regulatory environment is even slightly better than that of Brazil, and then also Equatorial Guinea, and then I think Canada, Newfoundland, which I'd have to double check. But it just shows you that we've done a lot within the 7-year time frame to put in place the necessary legal and regulatory frameworks.
Welcome back. We are speaking to Dr. Theophilus Acheampong. He's an energy economist and political risk analyst. We are speaking to him about Ghana's oil and gas industry and how well we fared after 10 years in terms of revenue, job creation, and also looking at our local content policy and laws. So, Doc, You touched on Ghana's local content, and I'm sure that's an issue that's very dear to your heart, as it is to all of us Ghanaians. How do you see Ghana's local content and local participation policy?
Again, I think the policy was passed with a lot of goodwill, but goodwill does not necessarily translate into jobs or contracts, within the industry. What I mean by that is the law as we have in terms of LI 2204 is fairly prescriptive, right down to the level of how many people needs to be hired in certain areas, whether you're doing well services or drilling or engineering. And it's prescriptive to the extent, again, that we want to attain 90% local content, as in when the law was passed, yes, by 2020. Yes. Today, as we speak, we're in 2018. And the latest statistics, as I checked, was that the local content levels in Ghana, as measured or as defined within the Act and as measured by the likes of the Petroleum Commission, is still below 20%, actually within 16 to about 18% in terms of local content participation. So that just tells us a number of things. A number of things being that, yes, we've passed the Act and enabling environment, but the companies are still struggling to actually compete, to deliver the services that are needed within the industry. And that comes from a number of things. Two things being the technical capacity or capability of the companies to actually undertake some of these work that needs to be done, but also the financial capacity of the companies to do the work. Remember, this is an industry that is heavily capital intensive. And if we're in an environment where you have to go borrow at 30% from the banks to finance your operations, whereas someone else might be coming in with, 10 or 5%, loan in terms of interest rate from an external bank, it makes them a bit more competitive in terms of their pricing than the local partner. So that means we've got to do a lot to actually push towards meeting all these enhance the local content levels.
Okay, so you talked about the new EMP law giving provision for a local company to have a 5% carried interest or stake in oil contracts. One would think that this is a very perfect arrangement to help rope in the local companies to build their capacities as well, and also to give them participation in the sector. How come we are not able to find Ghanaian companies to do that? Is it the capacity? Is it the financial commitment? What exactly is the problem?
I think really it's a question of financial resources, but also a question of of capacity. This is an industry that is extremely risky, particularly within the exploration stage. So when you sign a petroleum agreement with the government, you are required to undertake certain minimum work obligations, which typically includes one drilling, one well or two wells, a wildcat well, but also acquiring so many kilometers of seismic 3D, the stuff that allows them to actually identify whether an oil is in a reservoir or not. The chances of making a discovery typically is about 20%, which means 4 out of every 5 wells that you drill would end up being a loss. Yeah. And if you're having to spend in excess of 50 million USD to drill that one well, in which there's an 80% chance of you losing all of that money, do we have companies in Ghana that are prepared to take on that gamble or that risk? So you begin to see where the dynamics sort of play out within that from the capital perspective. There's still not a lot of clarity within the law as to how the company is going to be selected or which company is going to be given that 5% equity to partner with the IOC together with GMPC. There's potential for some rent seeking if this is not made too clear, that you might end up having some politicians using their cronies to take, that 5% equity in these blocks, and it's one of the areas that we need further clarity on as we head into the auction or the licensing round.
Following a recent, victory, I should say, in the Hitler's ruling against Ivory Coast, you raised the point in one of your lectures recently that Ghana needs to, as a matter of fact, resolve our eastern border demarcation with Togo.
Yes.
There have been some opposition to that, saying that petroleum experts will tell you that, hey, look, go in, start drilling, start exploring. When you find something, and automatically you would be forced to, resolve it. But you are of the point that we should resolve it as a matter of urgency before we continue with any form of exploration in that sector. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, my fundamental premise really is the fact that we want to increase oil and gas exploration. We want to get more production going. And the governments, a lot of their key pledges, such as the one district, one factory, free SHS, these would all come from AFA amounts, and therefore we need a lot more revenues coming from production, which then means that we have to get exploration activity levels increasing. If the Cote d'Ivoire maritime border issue with Ghana is anything to go by, we started talking to the Ivorians back in the early 90s, or late 80s, early 90s, thereabout. And it was back and forth. There was no agreement reached until we made a discovery in 2007. And then subsequently, because oil was discovered, they all said, okay, well, this is where the border is, and this is where it shouldn't be, all that stuff. But I really think that we should use the Ivorian case study as a guide. It's better to delimit the border and know where the clear lines are drawn, such that if Exploco was doing any seismic work and they got to that part of the border, nothing precludes them from speaking to the Togolese authorities to turn the ship around and get that information. But from an investment point of view, for the IOC coming in to do the work, it gives them that certainty to know that this is where the border is. I've always said that petroleum is no respecter of artificial boundaries, or geology, is no respecter of these artificial boundaries. So it's still possible to make a discovery that actually goes across both sides of the boundary. But because you now know where the boundary is, it means that you can enter into the revenue sharing agreement, the joint development zone, at a much faster time pace than now waiting to resolve the issue of the border before now going into talk about revenue sharing arrangement. I think we've got a strong case to actually make, on the basis of what happened in the ITLOS ruling with Cote d'Ivoire, where the court ruled on the basis of the equidistance principle, which Ghana had long held onto. And it's that same principle that actually been used to bisect the Togolese, the Eastern maritime border, right? But that is not being agreed to, on paper. And I think it would be good for both countries to actually sit down and actually, take steps towards resolving the Eastern maritime border. Because at the end of the day, if I am an investor coming in and I'm coming in to sign a petroleum agreement, you want me to invest in excess of, sometimes 100 million USD just within the exploratory phase to drill a well. And I don't have certainty that if I make a discovery, this actually belongs to the state of Ghana. It creates a lot of uncertainty. We saw that with before the ITLOS ruling, the Ivorians took Ghana to the ITLOS court, and the court ruled in their provisional measures that Tullow could not drill the extra 10 wells that they needed for the 10 field. Yes. And therefore, between 2015 to September 2017, when the substantive case was ruled upon, all those investments had to be put on hold, pending the resolution of that. And I think that's not exactly good, because every year that is lost, from a financial perspective, when you do discount the potential cash flows, you would never really recover that amount back anyway.
Government says that since we made the oil discovery in 2007, We have been drilling, and we haven't made any new discoveries since then. And so they are moving towards what they call the accelerated exploration campaign. In that sense, what they are saying is within the last quarter of this year, 2018, we will be awarding exploration licenses for about 6 oil blocks to deserving companies, companies that have the capacity and capability to maybe drill in deep waters between 2,000 to 4,000 meters. Going forward, how do you see the viability of that? How do you see Ghana's oil and gas industry? Are we moving in the right direction? What are the red flags that we need to pay attention to as a country, and to be able to maximize revenue from this sector and help in national development?
I think going forward in terms of the outlook for the sector, I'm much more optimistic about the oil and gas sector. We're very likely to see activity levels increase in terms of production, but also in terms of getting exploration back and going again. Exploration stalled between 2015-16 and even 2014 for a number of factors, key amongst them being the maritime border dispute ruling, but also the fall in oil prices, which then meant across the board there was a lot of capital rationing, and these IOCs had to decide which were the most prospective areas to spend their monies on. We're now seeing oil prices around $69, $70 a barrel, so it's fairly recovered, which then means that we should see an improvement in terms of the exploration activity levels going on in the country. But we also have new fields that are coming on stream. So we've had 10 which is come on stream, is going to ramp up production. Actually, Tullow just announced just within the last month that they will start drilling the wells that they didn't do because of the ICLOS ruling this year and then going into next year. Sankofa is being ramped up as well. And then we've had Exxon coming in, but we've also had ACA coming in to take over the Hess block, and they are looking at first oil by 2021. But it's exciting times for the industry in Ghana, and I dare say we're still one of the few countries in sub-Saharan Africa who, when you look at how we're managing the newfound resource wealth, are doing it slightly much better than others. There's room always, for improvement, but I'm quite optimistic about Ghana's oil and gas industry going forward.
So thank you very much, Dr. Acheampong, for being with us today. It's been great having you on the program, and we've learned a lot. Right now, we feel, motivated, we feel empowered, and we are positive for the future in terms of outlook for the oil industry. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. All right. Great.
All right.
All right.